All right, so just welcome everyone. I'm Peter. I work for the town of Dartmouth. I'm part of the Broadband Study Committee that the town started, I don't know, about a year ago now. We have a couple members from the Broadband Committee. Saul Raposa, who's in the back, he's a chairperson. Kevin Estes is also a member of the committee, and he is also a planning board member. So tonight we're going to hear from Jeff from Entry Point. Entry Point is a company that the town of Dartmouth has contracted as a consultant to do a broadband study, feasibility study for us. So they're gathering information on what people are looking to see improvements on, or what type of service they have now, and any kind of upgrades they'd like to see in the future. And then also part of that study is to do a very high overlook at what the costs of such a project would be. You know, that's usually the number one question from everyone as far as like costs, but the town hasn't drilled down to that yet. We're working through a process. The process is not a 2-month-long process. The process as a whole, if we were to try to offer service, we're talking 3-4 years down the road, you know, at the very earliest probably. So it's a long process, but we are at the beginning stages of it. And so today, Jeff's going to give you a little bit of a background on what the different options are, and get your questions. So let's hear from Jeff first.
Thanks, Peter. He wants me to stay behind the mic, so normally I'd just walk out here and have a conversation, but feel free to ask questions as we go through this. You're all here because you're interested in this topic, either because you don't want the town to do anything or you do want the town to do something. So we're gonna, really we want to talk about why is the town tackling this issue, and what are the drivers, and then what are the reasons to do it and what are the reasons not to do it. And so all of it's part of this study. It's partly a feasibility study, but it's also creating a strategy or creating a plan for how the town wants to think about this infrastructure as it goes forward. I'm going to go into presentation mode. So I use Kevin Kelly a lot. He wrote this book, New Rules to a New Economy, back in the mid-90s. So it's an early internet days. What'd I do, Peter? There we go. And a lot of it's still relevant. I mean, he'll use some language in there where you think, all right, this was written in the 90s because he's talking about CD-ROM. But the new economy is the digital economy. And we haven't moved fully through the curve of the digital economy. We're just going to continue to get more digital. I mean, obviously with AI and quantum computing, we're going to go deeper into digital. But part of his thesis was this statement: communication's not just a sector of the economy, it is the economy. And for those of us who work from home or rely heavily on this infrastructure, it's much harder to participate in the economy if we have bad tools or bad resources. That's part of why the town is taking this issue seriously and diving deeper into it. A key consideration is around this question of whether this is now essential infrastructure. So as I talk about it, I'm going to talk about infrastructure, and for us that means wires. Specifically, it means fiber, the way we think about infrastructure. Another layer is who's going to operate the infrastructure. So those are two different things. Just what is the infrastructure? It's another question, who's going to operate it? And then third question is what services can I access across that infrastructure? So you have the wires themselves, in some cases it's wireless, but that's the infrastructure, who operates it, and then what's the service. So as we think about it, the history of this industry really is embedded in telephone and cable TV. And the model for both telephone and cable TV was one wire, one service. And if you want to compete, you got to build your own wire, right? You got to run your own wire if you want to compete against what already exists. And that's the legacy. Neither one of those companies thought that the internet would wipe out their core business initially, but it became obvious that it was going to. So today, both the cable TV company, which is Comcast here, and the telephone company, which is Verizon, their real business now is the internet, right? Those legacy businesses, they know they're dying, and that's been obvious for quite a while. And so they are an ISP. They're an internet service provider. That is their future, and it's really been their growth business for the last 20 years. So as we think about it, they want to continue to think about this infrastructure as an amenity, purely from the reason that it's not regulated, right? Utilities end up getting regulated. If it's a utility, you're going to have the Public Utility Commission overseeing it and setting rates and setting policy around that regulated utility. They want this to continue to be unregulated space, which gives them freedom to price things where they want to, and gives them, they've had more pressure since COVID on speeds, but they want to be able to manage both speed and price without having a regulatory body sort of pressing down on them. So as a town, part of the question is, if the town gets into this space, they would do so because there's a shared belief that it's essential, that you can't participate in the economy if you don't have a certain level of speed or if you can't afford it. So for those who live in Dartmouth but can't afford the infrastructure, it's a real problem because they can't work from home. Their kids are going to have a harder time doing homework and various other societal issues. So that's an important question, is the town of Dartmouth ready to say, this is essential infrastructure, therefore X, we're going to do X. This has come up in a few meetings, so I looked this up just a few minutes ago. We're working with the city of Quincy, and in Quincy there are 2,800 houses or condos, living units per square mile. In Dartmouth, there's 183, which makes life great from a beauty point of view, right? Feels semi-rural down here. You drive from here to the water and it's beautiful. It complicates building infrastructure because you've got fewer households to share that fixed cost, right? There's going to be a certain cost to build the infrastructure. So assuming that, I looked this up on Bing, so assuming Bing is accurate, those are probably the biggest headwinds, is that you've got fewer households to share the common cost of the network. A key thing that the committee's been working on, and a key driver of this meeting, is that there is a website, and on the website there's a survey. And so, a key thing in terms of the work this committee's doing is being able to tell the select board what the level of interest is or what the level of demand is in the community. So we would strongly encourage you to go on dartmouthfiber.com and take the survey. If you're interested in staying in touch with the work of the committee and how this progresses, there's a contact form on the website, and it will be very helpful for those who want to stay abreast of it to put in your name and email address, and then the committee has a way to stay in touch with you as it goes forward. Anybody here taken the survey yet? Half of you? Okay, good work. Get your friends too. We were right around 600 responses after what, 2 weeks, Peter? So that's good. We're hoping to push that up above 1,000. So three of the key questions I kind of referenced, ownership or control. So whoever owns the infrastructure has control. Makes sense. The other is governance. Governance just means the town could own it, but not operate it. So they could outsource operation of the network and still own it. And that's probably even a likely thing. It's probably less likely that the town would own it and operate it. They probably would outsource the operations, especially in the early days, while they're getting going, to a third party who does this. But they would go through a procurement process, public RFP process, to get the best pricing they could. But these big companies that take Verizon and Comcast, they outsource a lot of what they do. They outsource a lot of their construction, and they outsource a lot of their network operational functions. So while you may not know of these companies, there's plenty of companies that do this. This is the space they live in. And then the third thing is the business model or the operational model, and I'll talk more about that as we go through this. But these are probably the key strategic questions the committee's considering, in addition to, is this essential infrastructure? As far as this report that we're working on, it is a feasibility study, but it's a little bigger than feasibility. We're going to be looking at each of these categories, each of these concerns, and then they'll show up in a report that I think we'll be done with probably in the next 3 months. So when we talk about infrastructure, DSL is that's Verizon's legacy infrastructure. So in some places, Verizon does have Fios, which some of you have used. These dots are representative of the capacity of these different media. So DSL's Verizon, Starlink is Elon Musk's satellite system. You may not know, but Amazon is about to release a competitive product to Starlink, to Elon Musk's satellites. So Amazon will have their own satellite system, which at this point they're saying is going to be less expensive than Starlink. And then cable would be Comcast. And then 5G. Cable is pushing up, so they've been at gig. They're now advertising 2 gig. They're even talking about 10 gig. These are shared networks. And so when they say this is a gig network, what that means is a certain number of homes are sharing a node, and that the node is capable of doing 1 gig or 2 gigs or 10 gigs. That means if you're up in the middle of the night and nobody else is, and you're on the network, you're gonna have all that capacity. If you get on at 8 o'clock on a Friday night and all your neighbors are watching movies at the same time you are, you're getting a sliver of that, whatever that capacity is. So time of use will matter a lot in terms of reliability and the capacity of the pipe. And then 5G. 5G is wireless. We always say the faster a wireless network gets to fiber, the better it's going to work, because it depends on fiber. So it's not something separate from fiber. It depends on the fiber, and the faster it gets back to the fiber, the faster it's going to go. So the town is looking at fiber, and when you look at the capacity of the pipe, fiber's the future. And I think that you probably all know this, but they've done tests of up to 150 million megabits per second across fiber for 1,000 kilometers. So, and it's getting better all the time. What they're able to do is over time reduce the friction. So it's light, so it's traveling at the speed of light, but there's friction which slows it down, and so they are able to, over time, they're figuring out how to reduce that friction. The point, though, of fiber is that it is we'll say it's 50-year infrastructure. I actually think it's going to be more than 50 years, that it's going to be the technology for this. But the key thing is that if the town can make an economic case to deploy it, it's going to last a really long time because it's glass and communications travel at just under the speed of light. It's the cable companies, they have not fully jumped to fiber yet. They will be forced to, I believe, but part of their networks is fiber. And in time, I think they're going to be forced to go fiber all the way because they're going to get overbuilt by a competitor. So anyway, the key point here is fiber's got way more capacity than these other solutions, and fiber is the future.
What was the 50-year reference you had?
That it'll be 50-year infrastructure. It'll last the glass will last. I think it's going to be more 50 to 100-year infrastructure. With technology, people don't like hearing it's going to last for 100 years. We're going to have to change the electronics. They'll rotate every 7 to 10 years, but the glass itself and the capacity of the fiber is going to make this 50-year infrastructure or more. I already referenced this. These shared networks, what you get is you end up getting a lot of homes sharing a node. Coax works this way. Some fiber networks are designed this way. A lot of fiber networks are. But DSL is also shared infrastructure. The alternative, and this is a decision the committee will make, is whether it builds a dedicated network where everybody has a dedicated connection into a switch. The switch still will have a certain capacity, but in a switch network, I can give one neighbor a 10 gig connection and the neighbor next to him a 1 gig connection and the neighbor next to him a 40 gig connection. If it's a switched Ethernet network. On a shared system, the neighbors are all sharing the same node and they're all impacting each other's reliability. So in busy times, it's not going to perform as well. A switched network doesn't behave that way. A switched network, because you're tying directly into the switch is designed to handle capacity, and you don't have neighbors having an impact on your performance. So it's just one of the decisions. Yep.
Another way of saying that is it like with the shared, everybody's on the same wire, but with the distributed or the dedicated, everybody's got their own wire.
Everybody's got their own connection to the switch versus, they're PON, passive optical networks if they're fiber, but cable's the same, designed on the same principle. And you've got lots of homes where there's a choke point and they're all coming into that choke point, and if nobody's on it, you're probably good. The other thing with cable is that the signal starts to degrade in a matter of feet, where with fiber, the signal doesn't degrade. It's like 40 miles, might be 40 kilometers, before that signal starts to degrade. So if you're at the end of the road, the cable road, there's a chance that you're going to always have a reliability problem because the signal degrades. And if you're on when all your neighbors are on, it's also going to impact your performance, your reliability. So these are just considerations as the town thinks about building a network to build for reliability and also to build for the future in terms of what the network's capable of. Another consideration is it a symmetrical network? A lot of marketing games are played with this, meaning people will say it's symmetrical when it's not really. Some of you guys were talking about your upload speeds. COVID made people aware of this problem because Teams and Zoom tax the upload. So download means you're bringing information from the internet, from the cloud to your computer. Upload means you're sending it from your computer out to the cloud. And COVID made it obvious that our upload speeds were a problem. Good fiber networks are going to be symmetrical, meaning you're going to have the same download and upload capacity. And if you need to increase that capacity, you can do it. Those are the best fiber networks, is where you can actually, if I need more capacity, I can go get it. Not all networks are designed that way. So going to the ownership question, a key reason for the town to think about owning this infrastructure is that we think a consolidation is inevitable. So this is a snapshot. This is not the full picture, but this is what happened in the cable industry. Comcast started as a small cable company in Mississippi, and then started acquiring neighboring network, and eventually became the largest cable company in the world through consolidation, through acquisitions. Cox did the same thing, and then Charter did the same thing. And we're showing Time Warner, which is really Charter now. But those three companies became the enormous companies they are largely through acquisition. And the reason that's relevant is that the whole country is going to get fiber. And I'd say the country's you're going to get fiber. Even with your density numbers, you're going to get fiber. If the town doesn't own the infrastructure, we're going to see this same cycle with fiber networks. So you got all these regional fiber, they're called overbuilders, developers, building fiber networks. Big companies are going to consolidate the industry. So we're going to end up probably with the same players. T-Mobile's getting in the game where they've only been wireless historically, but I think we're going to end up with AT&T, probably Verizon. I think those companies both have legs, which means I think they'll be around. But you'll end up with Charter, Comcast, Time Warner. AT&T's partnered with BlackRock, and they're deploying as much fiber, and I think you'll see them start to acquire fiber networks, and probably already have. But there's going to be a consolidation so that there's just a few players. And so the point of all that is, one of the key decisions that Dartmouth has is, do you want a national monopoly to be your communications infrastructure, or do you want a locally controlled network? And there are reasons to do both. I mean, letting the private sector do it is lower risk for the town itself. Having the town do it, I think the lowest cost option long-term for you is going to be town-owned infrastructure. And I'll make that case. I think that's going to be the lowest cost, and it's going to be locally responsive, meaning if you want to talk to the board that runs the network, you'll be able to do that. These national companies, pretty hard to influence their policy, pretty hard to influence their pricing. And if I think we will end up with monopolies, meaning it'll consolidate down so that each town will have a fiber provider. And when they're the only game in town, the pricing will probably reflect that if they don't have competition. So I think that's the future. You're going to end up with a fiber network. I think it's probably going to end up being one winner. It doesn't make sense to have multiple networks over the long term. So the reason these slides are on there is to show the past probably is an indication of the future. And where we got this with cable, we're probably going to get it with fiber as well. So this is public infrastructure versus private. Public, I'm saying, designed to deliver maximum level service for the minimum price. So that's kind of a utility model that the town wants people to be able to work from home. The town wants people to want to, we were talking about the fact that the train's coming, right, from Boston. You want people to want to live here, to live and spend their money here and buy homes here. the town is aligned with a vision of, good communication, good education, ability to work from home, a communication network that can accommodate healthcare needs, those kinds of things. Those are all incentives for the town. Private infrastructure, I've put designed to deliver minimum level of service at maximum possible price. It's not that they set out to deliver the minimum level service. It's the fact that the way they get the maximum profit is by delivering minimum service. I mean, it's what will the market bear? And so it's not a negative, it's just the nature of the beast, right? So it's just, the incentives are different for this infrastructure. And I think it's appropriate to think about these as digital roads. And the analogy is the physical roads. Why do cities and towns own the physical roads? I think the same logic applies here. Not saying they should own the service necessarily, but the same logic applies to why would a city or town own these digital roads. So, I think you will end up with a monopoly. All right, the business model question is, what's relevant here is what we call open access. So the historical model is one wire, one service, runs across that, and if you want to compete, you got to deploy your own wire. So where I live, I have both the telephone company and the cable company, and I now have Google Fiber in my neighborhood. So I've got 3 wires coming to my house for those 3 companies. And they don't take the infrastructure down. So I don't use Comcast, I don't use CenturyLink, but I still have their wires. So open access is, this is what this is saying is, the logic would be that we would build a road for UPS and then say nobody can drive on that road except UPS. Or we're going to build a road for FedEx and nobody else drives on that road. Open access is the idea that we create one road and everybody drives on that road. So we just open it so that whatever ISP wants to bring their service, they can. So does that make sense? That logic of open access. So it's basically shared infrastructure. I'll show you the way our company thinks about this, and this is just a little video. So basically you're moving the ISP to the cloud. If I get this thing to play.
Are you saying if the town put in fiber, that other companies can use that fiber as well as the towns?
Yep. Yep.
So if I built a new house, no fiber's coming to it now, the town fiber is linked to my house, I can choose to use Comcast as a provider.
Yeah, any ISP, they would have to say, we're gonna bring our service across this infrastructure, but you would have minimum of 5 options. Quincy is deploying this kind of network. In Quincy, the population's 100,000. They'll probably have 10 ISPs on that network. And then people can just choose. Let me see if I get this to play, and then you can kind of see how this works.
So the town could rent out that infrastructure to these other
Yeah,
ISPs.
the way it works is they're in the cloud, and it's easy for them to come onto the it takes them to about 2 hours just to to basically enroll on it. And then they have their own web presence in the portal, and it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's like the cost to them is less than $1,000, and that's mostly labor. Yeah, question.
But I think of it like shared cell towers.
Yeah, I mean,
Cell tower might have.
yeah. Yeah, it's shared infrastructure is what it is. You've got a neutral host of infrastructure that, we're a neutral host. We're agnostic to who uses it. There's going to be some rules, but that's a good analogy. Let me come out here and see if. Well, that's the decision. Is the town should the town become that host? Yeah.
So if we waited for, say, Verizon to bring their fiber service to Dartmouth, then your only option for fiber would essentially be using
FiOS.
FiOS.
Right.
But if Dartmouth builds the infrastructure, runs the wires and the equipment, then if FiOS wants to participate, we can purchase through FiOS. If, you know, AT&T Fiber wants to participate, and all these other
Yeah.
ISPs, you have a choice.
Yeah.
To run across the Dartmouth fiber.
Infrastructure. Yeah.
That's where some of the savings comes from, is the competition amongst the ISPs.
Right, yeah. Because I just moved here in May, and I had FiOS in my home, and I also had Comcast in my home, and I had some competition between the two. And my prices
Reflect
up
that.
there reflected that versus what I'm paying for
Yeah.
Comcast now.
Yeah, you can never thought.
For inferior service.
Yeah. Let me just try and play this little video. And you can see how this works when they're in the cloud.
That the video would work faster if we had fiber here.
Yeah. Yeah, so this would be your portal. So when you log in, find a plan, then you go out to your portal and you just look at the options that are there. And in this case, I think there's 4 or 5 companies in there, but they all have different plans as well. So once you find the plan you want, you go through the legal stuff, hit subscribe, and it takes about 30 seconds. And the software builds the connection, so it provisions the network, and then you're connected. So it's just like shopping on Amazon, right? It's just kind of the same experience. And then if you want to switch, you go back in, you hit unsubscribe, and go find a different plan. So if your ISP went down, you just go unsubscribe and go find another ISP. You don't have to call somebody or have a truck come to your house.
So the town would not have a plan of their own.
They could. The town's not thinking of being an ISP, but they could. It doesn't take much. And the other thing about this, because you've moved the ISPs to the cloud, you could have an ISP in LA be your ISP, because all they need is a cloud presence, or Chicago or Detroit. So the importance of that is just driving the competition. You may want to use a local ISP so that you can call them and talk to them. But once they're cloud, they can be anywhere. And which ends up being good, because it's almost a lights out operation for them, because they don't have infrastructure responsibilities. So it's probably lower margins, but it's also lower cost for them to operate.
The town will be able to make money off of renting the infrastructure to these ISPs.
Yeah, and so the approach typically is treat it like a utility. So while the town would want to build their reserve for a rainy day, it's a nonprofit thing. So yes, but the town's main interest is covering their costs and then building a reasonable reserve.
Again, another good comparison, and correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of how we have electricity delivered to us today. We're using Eversource, we have to pay them a certain amount for the maintenance and the lines themselves, but then we can choose our own electric provider that provides electricity to them. And that's possible today because it's a regulated
Industry.
industry.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the absence of regulation, which it doesn't seem that the internet's going to be regulated, in the absence of that, the cities will come in, and because cities are locally accountable, it's kind of it's in lieu of regulatory frameworks, where the constituents, can unelect people if they don't manage the way the citizens want them to manage. It's sort of in lieu of regulation. You can self-govern because you can elect people not to be on the select board or not on the fiber board. All right, I'm almost done. 2 other slides. One is, once you get to this kind of network, which is a software-defined network, you can also virtualize it and run other services on the network other than the internet. And this is confusing to people, but you could create local education networks, local healthcare networks. Aging in place is becoming a bigger thing. We're actually doing a lot of work on smart grid, what can be called smart grid. It's grid modernization. As renewables become more and more present in the electrical grid, they want to be able to have the grid responsive in real time, so the communication network becomes important. But they don't want that information out on the internet, so these local private networks become important. So that's just an additional capability. And then the last slide is just kind of to go through some of the advantages and disadvantages. So the middle column is public ownership, and then the column on the right is private ownership. We could have an additional column which is status quo if we wanted to. So private ownership would be the idea that you're going to entice a private investor to build fiber as opposed to having the town build fiber. So if we were to go to Wall Street, find an infrastructure fund to invest in Dartmouth, the cost of capital, which is the first row, you can get public financing probably in the 4 to 5% range, but let's just say 4 to 6. But I think we're seeing 4 to 5%. So the cost of capital is lower, where private ownership, you're going to see a blended capital stack between 8 and 14%. So just the cost of money is going to be lower for a public network. The next line is cost of a gig. So a gig is 1,000 up, 1,000 down. We don't know enough to say 65. What I'm really illustrating here is that public ownership is going to be less expensive than private ownership. And there's two reasons for that. One is cost of capital, the other is profit. Private owners are going to want a profit return, probably at least 15%. And so if you've got a utility model in the public, the total cost to the consumer is going to be lower. And out of this study, we will produce a projection of what we think those monthly costs are going to be. So it won't be a hardened number, it'll be a projection, but we will come out with what we think it'll be. I'm curious what you're paying today for your connectivity. Do you know?
I pay $145 a month for 300 meg.
145, so that's just internet.
That's just internet, it's not counting cable TV.
Yeah.
I'm at 40,
Are you?
$40.
40?
No TV,
Yeah.
I pay
but
about,
it's wicked slow.
about 155. I just moved to town 4 months ago, and that's internet and cable.
155
Yeah.
through Comcast probably.
Yeah, I think it's 200.
Yeah.
Maybe that's I might sign up for.
They give you that first year discount.
First year discount.
Yeah, because I was just thinking about how I answered the survey, and I said, I'm paying 85 for just internet, but yeah, that's with.
It's your teaser rate.
discounts, and, everyone's talking
Yeah,
about how
I've been
things
here
are
5
doubling.
years, so.
It ends up doubling, or almost doubling after 2 years.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases.
Well, I have 87 miles out here, but I've had 20 years of extending on gas, whatever we're calling it then. But I have the lowest speeds, but I work from home.
Yeah.
And I get thrown off the internet constantly, and I'm always calling. I keep getting a notice saying they're limiting your service, and I'm off, kicked off. It's really frustrating, yeah. And I live over near the mall, so I'm not in a real rural area. I'm near the college. And
Yeah.
I'm really calling.
And that's
Very
Comcast.
frustrating.
That's Comcast?
So you're 135 for both, is that what you said?
We're 155.
155 for both,
With no discounts.
I'm at 90 just for running.
just for
I can't
broadband.
remember what.
Yeah, if he's only had it for a year, he's got a discount.
Yeah.
I used to pay right around that, and now I'm paying $229 a month because I, quite frankly, complained to them that I'm a one-time customer, and you're the only show in town, so you're screwing us,
Yeah.
and I want a better rate.
Yeah.
So they gave me $10 off.
prior to moving here, I lived in Sharon for 20 years, and around 2017, 2018, I was paying about $200 a month for a bundle, internet, landline, and TV, and I'm very frustrated with that. And so I went to them and I said, I just want internet only.
Yeah.
And I installed a digital antenna in my attic to get a television service, and I bought a voice over internet protocol device for a landline.
Yeah.
And all of the equipment costs and the electrician's costs to run, and I also ran Ethernet cable throughout the whole house.
Yeah.
And so the total cost of that was about $1,500. But then I was saving about $120 a month in
Yeah.
those payments to Comcast, so that all paid for itself in a little over a year.
Yeah.
And then in the 5 years after, I probably saved $4,000 or $5,000 in reduced fees. So, and then COVID happened, and I was really glad to have
Yeah.
wired internet access in the whole house. So, so I'm looking to get back to
Better solution.
something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I'm thinking about the electrical equivalent to this, but, when I use more electricity, I pay more
Yeah.
to the provider. I think I'm also paying more to the carrier, is that right?
Yeah. It's.
How does that?
Yeah, you are, but it's not as, I mean, you think about water. If I consume more water, so I live in the West, so water's a big deal. And if I consume more water, then that makes sense that I would pay more because it's a scarce resource. But with bandwidth, it is a scarce resource.
You pay more for the pipe.
Yeah, right. And we create bandwidth with electricity, right? I mean, it's not as good an analogy as water, and even not as good an analogy as electricity, because there's a process that consumes resources to generate the electricity. And there's a process here, but it's they're following this model because they can, and they know that if they sell you this package where you get 300 meg or a gig, they can charge you $150. That does not reflect their cost to create that bandwidth.
I guess what I'm asking is, would we be getting two charges like I do in electric bill? One to the
Oh, okay.
ISP that I
Yeah.
hire and one to the town?
There's really three, because there's a cost for infrastructure, so there's a capital cost, which in this model can be paid off, meaning there's a cost to put it in. So if you built a home, you would have probably around a $5,000 charge to connect to the water system. You'd have a charge to connect to the electrical system, and you'd have a charge to connect to the sewer. When towns and cities do this, there will start to be a fiber connection fee. But when it's paid off, that's like 35–40% of the total bill. I mean, that's the expensive part. The town could operate this network probably in the range of $22 a month per customer. So that line item to operate it will probably be around $22.
Okay, so it's not proportional at all to how much you've paid your ISP provider.
Yeah, and then the third one is the service, and they may tier their plan that way, but that's one thing that competition will correct for, is that competition will affect that equation. So it won't be, the magnitude of it will be reduced.
I think your question was more like, are you going to have the opportunity to have measured service? Meaning you're going to pay only for what you use on like a per gig transfer basis.
I sort of assume that, but.
The plans that most of the providers are looking at are measured in bandwidth and not actual data transfer. So if you
Sure. Yeah.
similar to what you're used to now, the difference being that there's more, through this process, if we choose to go down this path, there's more competition, and that will drive the price down for the ability to use up to a certain amount of bandwidth for the size of the pipe.
Right, but the charge from the town would not be dependent on.
I think we
whatever ISP charge, bandwidth charge I pay for.
Would say that again.
That's $65.
Yeah, you're gonna have an access charge to connect, just like, I don't know, like, I still have a sewer betterment charge on my tax bill. Because, my house is only 20-something years old. So I think it's a 30-year betterment that for the house. Once that's paid for, that charge goes away. But that's just to connect me to the sewer system.
Yeah, that's the right.
Outlays on the front side of this are gonna be a good number, and therefore, we're gonna have to probably charge, just like with his sewer, for the first 10, 15, 20 years, there's gonna be a charge built into the bill.
For capital.
For capital to build the system, but then once the system has recuperated its costs, it'll probably go away, and then you'll just have a flat fee for accessing the system, and then you'll have a fee based on whichever ISP that you want to use, and you can choose your band. I'm assuming this now.
Yep.
You can choose the bandwidth. So if you want that movie to download in a minute, you can buy this plan. If you want that movie to download in 30 seconds, choose this plan. If you want that movie to download in 10 seconds, choose that plan. And that's where your options as to how you use the system. I mean, so for you, maybe you're just streaming movies or you're just going online, where this gentleman here is uploading giant files. He's willing to pay $14.99, where you only pay $4.99 because you don't have that much usage. Where he will gladly pay $14.99 and upload a gig file in a half a second or a minute or whatever it may be. That is where having all these options makes it better for all of us. And we're not tied to just like, I'm completely shocked by what she just said. I'm all set. I'm all set with Comcast.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm the angry blue collar guy in the committee. So it irritates me that you're giving up $800 a month. They're not providing a service that's even mildly appropriate. Not even mildly appropriate, and when you call them up, they don't know this. So that's what drove me to be on this committee. I don't know what drove other people to be on the committee, and I don't know what drove people to be here. But we need to inject some competition into the system, and they're not going to because they won't. It's not cost effective for Verizon to come in because Comcast is already here. So for the betterment of our community, for the betterment of our future, this is why we're doing this. This is why, with the question that you're asking, having these options available to us so that way we can keep our community growing and we can have good access to what is now a very, very vital part of modern society. It's no different than the road that goes by the building or the electricity that powers these lights. So this is why we're doing this. And I think having those options is the best option for us to be able to decide. Right there at the moment, at your computer, and like I asked before, you'll be able to do it on your phone. You'll literally be sitting at a red light and you can check the ISPs and, well, look, they just dropped their price by $1. Click, by the time you get home, you're on the new ISP, you're off and running, and you save yourself $1. Right?
Yeah, that's the way.
That's what we're trying to do.
Yep, yeah. So key thing is give people choice, create competition. So we'll, to finish this off, the advantages, disadvantages, the advantage of public ownership is long-term control. I think it is your lowest cost option because cost of capital is lower for the municipality and there's not profit. The advantage of private ownership is the town doesn't have to guarantee anything. They don't have to backstop any debt. Which the disadvantage of public ownership is that the town would have to guarantee the debt. It would be, betterment is the standard Massachusetts framework. legal framework. The town would want to do this as an opt-in service. So in a betterment, you actually build the sewer to everybody that's in the betterment area, geography. So this would be, and we're working through this with Quincy and others, pursuing an opt-in model so that people are not forced to do it, but it's available for those who want to participate in it. The disadvantage of private ownership is that the network can be sold, and really the implication of that is I think you'll end up with one fiber provider who is functionally a monopoly. And so the question is, do you want a monopoly that you can talk to, or do you want a national monopoly that whatever their policy and pricing structures are, that's what you get? So I think you will get fiber at some point. The question is when and who's going to own it. And that's really what this is all about.
Apart from Quincy, are there any other local communities that have done this? And do we know what the lessons learned there are?
Yeah, so it's quite common in Western Mass. They kind of had to because nobody was building to them. So there's probably 8 towns out in Western Mass that have done it. All of your neighbors are looking at it. So Fairhaven's been working on it, Westport, New Bedford. Taunton has a system. They haven't fully built out their city, but Taunton's been running a system for the last 5 years.
You guys started to answer the question I had. I know that FiOS comes down to Taunton, but is it coming down as a public service or is it coming down through Verizon?
Verizon.
So Verizon, there's enough population density to attract Verizon into Taunton, but not enough to attract them down.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think Verizon's trying to figure out what their strategy is. And I don't work for them, so I don't know. But they built out sort of in a patchwork in certain Massachusetts towns and cities. I think 5G, they sort of got distracted with 5G, and so did AT&T. And they thought 5G was the white knight. AT&T pivoted their strategy last March, 2 Marches ago. And now they're fiber to the home as primary strategy and 5G is a secondary, meaning we're going to build fiber everywhere and then attach 5G to it. Verizon may be sort of turning that direction. It's not totally clear. So they may get more aggressive building out FiOS. I know you've used FiOS, right?
Yeah, I have. And I recall that a lot of the infrastructure that was built, I mean, Taunton has had FiOS for quite some time. I don't think Verizon has done a lot of building out in some years. And
Yeah.
part of that was because they received federal funding to build out broadband networks across the country, and they did so. And when they met those requirements enough to be off the hook for paying back their subsidies they received from the government, there was no more incentive to build out because they built out at little to no cost. They're getting their subscriber money, and they met the requirements that I'm looking at because of the cost.
Yeah, and one thing is the town did about, 10, 15 years ago, reach out to some telecommunication networks about trying to get competition in here for cable and internet service, and Verizon said they're not interested in this area. It was a density issue. Again, it was more, just wasn't enough residents in just Dartmouth. They would want New Bedford and Fall River, I think, to be involved in it, and both the cities didn't want to look into it right at that point, so they kind of turned their backs and said, no, we're good.
Yeah, they have to weigh all the risk with the reward and how much profit they're going to make off of this and how long it's going to take for them to make profit. There's going to be talk about public service, take profit out of the equation. There's more incentive to build that out and attract those profit makers to the infrastructure build.
So I think we can stay around and answer some more questions if you have some more questions, but we'll just call this the official end. But what we ask is you share the dartmouthfiber.com website with all your friends, families, neighbors. Have them do the survey as much as possible. Like we said, we're at about 600 right now. We want to be over 1,000 to make it. I think the 1,000 mark was about where the numbers ring out to be, an official survey type deal, but we'd love to have way more than 1,000 responses. So please, thank you for coming, and thanks, Jeff. But we'll stick around and answer some more questions if you want.
Do you have a sense of what the